In this video, you will learn the basic functions of adjective clauses. An adjective clause is a subordinate clause that modifies a noun or a pronoun. It usually follows the word or words it modifies and tells what kind or which one. It answers the same questions that regular adjectives do. An adjective clause is usually introduced by a relative pronoun, a word that relates the clause to the word or words the clause modifies. These are the most common relative pronouns: that, which, who, whom, and whose. Like many words, these words can also do other jobs. They aren't exclusively relative pronouns, but when you see them, it's a signal that you might have an adjective clause. You'll know you have an adjective clause if you find one of these words and it's doing one of the following three functions. First, it refers to a preceding noun or pronoun. In other words, as a pronoun, it has an antecedent in the sentence, and that antecedent is going to come before it in the sentence. It connects the adjective clause with the rest of the sentence. It's not exactly a conjunction, but in the fact that it introduces the adjective clause and then refers back to another word in the main clause, it sort of serves a connecting function. It will also perform a function within its own clause. It could be the subject, a direct object, an indirect object, an object of a preposition, or a modifier in the adjective clause. This can get kind of tricky when you're trying to identify adjective clauses. If you've been taught that clauses have subjects and verbs, sometimes the relative pronoun may not be readily identifiable as a subject. So that's a pattern that you need to get used to looking for so that you aren't caught off guard when you don't see when the relative pronoun itself is functioning as the subject of the sentence. Here are some example sentences. Ms. Hastings is someone who enjoys teaching grammar. In this sentence, the adjective clause is who enjoys teaching grammar. Who is the relative pronoun. It immediately follows its antecedent, someone. Right? So the antecedent of the pronoun who is someone, and at the same time, this adjective clause, who enjoys teaching grammar, modifies the word someone. Who is also the subject of this clause. A good way to test for this, to figure out what function the relative pronoun performs in its own clause, is to substitute a more familiar personal pronoun, such as he or she, and to sometimes reorder the sentence pattern to make it fit. So here all you have to do is come up with an appropriate personal pronoun, she. She enjoys teaching grammar. In that sentence, she is the subject. So that is a signal to you that who is also functioning as the subject of this clause. Next sentence, the editorial that he wrote for the newspaper is being published. In this sentence, that he wrote for the newspaper is the adjective clause. That is the relative pronoun. It refers back to editorial. The antecedent is editorial, and the entire clause, that he wrote for the newspaper, functions to modify the word editorial. If I take it away, the editorial is being published. I don't know which editorial. That is functioning as the direct object of this clause. Here, you don't actually have to substitute a personal pronoun, excuse me, but you have to rewrite the structure of the sentence so it fits a more familiar pattern. In this sentence, the subject of the clause is he, and the verb is wrote. He wrote. What did he write? In this clause, he wrote that. He wrote that for the newspaper. That's how we know it's functioning as the direct object, because when we rewrite the clause, then it's in the correct sentence slot for direct object. Third sentence, my mother is the person whom I trust most. Whom I trust most is the adjective clause. Whom is the relative pronoun. It refers back to person. The entire clause modifies person, and person is the antecedent of whom. In this sentence, whom is again a direct object. Here we have to do both things. We have to substitute a personal pronoun. Here it makes most sense to use her, because we want the same case, the object case, the same case as whom, and we need a personal pronoun. So we've got the right pronoun, her I trust most, doesn't make sense. So we rewrite the sentence pattern, I trust her most, and we see that it comes after trust. It's receiving the trust. Sometimes the relative pronoun is left out of a sentence. When this happens, the pronoun is understood and still serves a grammatical function in the sentence. The editorial he wrote for the newspaper is being published. This is a sentence that we certainly would hear spoken, we may even encounter in writing. It's still an adjective clause. That is still part of the sentence. It's understood that it's left out. It's similar to a command sentence when somebody's saying, pick that up. The understood subject is you. So it's kind of functioning similar here. That is still part of the sentence even though we don't read it or speak it. The same thing's happening in the next example. My mother is the person whom I trust most. My mother is the person I trust most. I can leave the whom out. Everyone understands what I mean. It's perfectly acceptable to speak it this way. Very often we may see it this way written, but whom is still part of that sentence. All right, essential versus non-essential clauses. These are classifications of adjective clauses. Adjective clauses are going to be one of these two types. They will be essential or non-essential. Another word for both of these clauses is restrictive or non-restrictive. Essential clauses contain information necessary to the sentence's meaning. That's why they're called essential. The flute is the only instrument that I can play. Here the adjective clause is that I can play. That is the relative pronoun. It modifies and refers back to the word instrument. It also functions as the direct object of its own clause. Here's why it's essential and also why it's called restrictive. If I took that clause away, the sentence would read, the flute is the only instrument. That's likely not what the writer intends. It's also not true. So we need the clause that I can play so that the meaning of the sentence remains intact. It also kind of restricts what I mean by the only instrument. That's why it's called restrictive. When you have an essential clause, you use the relative pronoun that to introduce it. Unless, of course, you have something with a person, with a who or whom, but that gets into a separate, different issue. When you have essential clauses, you will not use commas. Commas are a signal that you can take the clause away and the basic meaning is not changed. So if I put a comma here, that would mean I could take it away and I'm not changing the meaning of a sentence, but that's not what's happening. We have to keep this here, so we would not use a comma. Non-essential clauses are also called non-restrictive. They contain information that can be omitted without affecting the sentence's basic meaning. The piano, which is my favorite instrument, is difficult to play. The adjective clause in the sentence is, which is my favorite instrument. Now this adjective clause modifies the word piano. If I take it away, I have, the piano is difficult to play. This is a complete sentence, complete thought. It makes sense by itself. And when I add the extra information, I'm not really changing the meaning of the sentence. Which is my favorite instrument is telling us more about the piano. It's telling us more about the speaker, but it's not affecting which piano we're talking about. So I don't really need it in the sentence. You would use which to introduce non-essential clauses, again, unless you have a who or whom situation. You do use commas with non-essential clauses, and that rule doesn't change regardless of whether or not you have which, that, or who. You do use commas with non-essential clauses because, again, the commas are a signal that you can take the clause away and the basic meaning of the sentence will not be affected. Here are some practice sentences. In these sentences, identify the adjective clauses in the following sentences. Circle the relative pronoun, draw an arrow to the word being modified by the clause, determine the function of the pronoun within its own clause, and determine whether the clause is essential or non-essential. Add commas where necessary. This would be a good time to pause the video, do the exercises, and then restart the video to hear me work through the answers. Number 1, the students who are trying out for the basketball team should meet in the gym after school. In this sentence, the adjective clause is who are trying out for the basketball team. Who is the relative pronoun, and its antecedent is students. The entire clause modifies students. Who is the subject of this clause? If I substitute a personal pronoun, they are trying out for the basketball team, I can more easily see that who is functioning as the subject of this sentence. In this sentence, we do need the adjective clause to restrict, to tell us which students we're talking about. This would be considered an essential clause because if I take it away, my sentence reads, the student should meet in the gym after school. But that basically is telling us that all of the students should meet in the gym after school, and that is not the meaning of the sentence. We need to limit the students, restrict the students to just those who are trying out for the basketball team. Because of that, I would not use commas in this sentence. Number 2, my only son, who likes dinosaurs, wants to be a T-Rex when he grows up. In this sentence, who likes dinosaurs is the adjective clause. Who is the relative pronoun modifying son? Who is the subject of this clause? Again, if I substitute a personal pronoun, he likes dinosaurs, I can easily see that who is functioning as the subject of this clause. Now this gets a little tricky. Some people might argue that we don't have enough context here to know how many sons there are and how many like dinosaurs. So we really could see this in a couple of ways. We could see it as the speaker has more than one son, but only one of them likes dinosaurs. So in that case, it would be essential to the sentence. It tells us which son we're talking about, and I would not use commas. It's also likely that the writer has put the word only in there to give the context that there's only one son, and that who likes dinosaurs is just functioning to tell us more about the son, so that the writer is intending to make it non-essential. In that case, we would drop commas in. But remember, most of the time this is coming up because you want to be clear in your own writing. So when you are writing, you have to decide if the clause is essential or non-essential based on the context you provided. And your inclusion of commas is part of that indication. So make sure that you understand the difference between essential and non-essential clauses and when to use commas so that you are always clear in your own writing.